Is that all you got? All right, that's more like it. So like I said, I'm going to ask each of our esteemed panelists to say a couple minutes of what's on their mind. Perhaps the biggest transformation they've seen in the field, or what they see in their own unique crystal balls. So Whitley, why don't we start with you, put you on the spot. What's on your mind?
Well, right now, looking out at all of you, being grateful that I can still see you, I think to myself, going back to when I started with this, they tried so hard to wipe us out, and here we are. You guys.
Wow, okay, Travis, you got to follow that. Over to you, Travis. What's on your mind?
We're making progress. Things have changed. You know, the government has made official announcements for the first time twice, and it didn't create much of a stir. But it's changing. I sense it from the beginning. It's been a profound reaction change to me over these years. The general acceptance is growing.
Can you guys hear? Thanks.
Yes, I was saying general acceptance is growing.
Today, this morning, was the first time I heard a group of 5 or 6 people where we were doing some television and interviews. And they were talking with great excitement, energy, questions, and maybe even, could this really be true, having to do with, are we finally getting close to some kind of a worldwide announcement that we're not alone in the universe? But this morning, what I was hearing were intelligent people having an argument with each other. Is it possible that the ETs are actually running the world through the trillionaires that are being supported by military? And then arguments to that as a possibility. And why do I think that's significant? It is the first time that I have ever heard strangers who are actually having a discussion about a possibility that what we are in right now is perhaps waking up for the first time about what is actually running Earth, and we better pay attention.
George, you have a mile-high vantage point of this and pretty much every other phenomena that's interesting in the world. What's on your mind these days?
What am I doing here? Normally I'm where Paul is. So this is kind of unique for me. Paul doesn't know this, but one of the reasons I got into the field of ufology as an investigative journalist was because of his father. I was born in Michigan, and I remember his dad coming to Michigan during a UFO case, and he said it was swamp gas. Remember that?
Okay, on to Richard.
Wait, the compliment's about to come. I think his father, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, was forced to say that by the government. I don't think he believed that. And subsequently, with the Lonnie Zamora case of New Mexico, officially convinced him that this was a real phenomenon. But it's great to be here on this panel with these esteemed members, and I'm looking forward to this.
Thank you, George.
You're not going to introduce me?
For the second time today.
I'm just kidding. I'm Richard Dole. I'm happy to be here. Honestly, I feel a bit overwhelmed that I'm in this company. As far as the biggest change and how I feel about where we are at in this world of ours, this is this area of contemporary ufology that we're in now, where we're talking actively about disclosure. This is a conversation I've been engaged in very actively for more than 20 years. Mm-hmm. I didn't even want to get involved in the disclosure debate at first. I remember when I first came into this field around 2000, 2001, I'd written a book on basically the UFO cover-up. So it was natural that people would ask me about disclosure. And my attitude back then was, that's a way premature conversation. Let's just get the cover-up locked up first. Let's just talk about that. But before very long, I was engaged in all of those conversations myself. And here we are now. I think in some ways I was trying to foresee this day that we're in. I could see back then that the age of total connectivity and internet inevitably would create a kind of a critical mass of shared information that conceivably would push this issue to the forefront. Because it was obvious even 20 years ago that a lot of the world was very interested in the subject, even if we weren't actively feeling comfortable talking about it. So I knew that there is a market or a public for this. And I just thought it's a matter of time and what will cause it and when will it happen. And now we're in that. We see that all of the pressure from below that this community has created for decades, it directly resulted in the actions we're now seeing by members of Congress today. That there's a direct relationship there. And so I think we should all be very proud of that, to be honest with you. And now we're at a new stage where we're starting to peel back some of the layers and beginning to see that there are increasingly new layers of complexity in this whole political future of ours. And how can disclosure happen? You have people talking about catastrophic disclosure and controlled disclosure. And it's kind of makes my head spin to know that we're actually in this world. All these years we were fighting for this. And Whitley, was exactly right. For years, the establishment, tried to crush us, and here we are. And I just think that's because every time the establishment has tried to convince us that UFOs aren't real, the operators of those craft never seem to get the memo that they're not supposed to exist after the Condon report, and then, countless times through media coverage in the 1980s and 90s, and yet here it is. And now, last March, the latest Arrow report basically said the same thing, didn't it? But here it is. The phenomenon doesn't stop. I was very glad to hear the commendation and tribute for Peter Davenport, who I greatly, greatly admire, and I'm an enormous fan of the National UFO Reporting Center. It's one of the most important websites out there. And all you have to do, is go to the New Fork site. I encourage all of you to go check it out. It's actually amazing reading. And what you will see is that there's a minimum 5,000-6,000 cases every year that are reported. And sure, they don't all get investigated, but just read them. Just take the time and go through them. You will see, I have a little test, I call it the wow test. When I read a case, does it make me say wow out loud? And it's like at least 1 out of 10, sometimes 1 out of 5. There's a lot of really great cases in there. And it's obvious this phenomenon is global. It is every day. It blankets the earth. And even here we are in June of 2024, it still does not really have the recognition that it demands as a global phenomenon of extraordinary technology and science by entities officially unknown that have a very active interest in this world, and I'm convinced in our species as well. So we're in an amazing time period. It's, in a lot of ways, it's frightening. We don't know what the future is going to bring in terms of technology, in terms of geopolitics, in terms of disclosure. But we can't ever complain that it's boring.
Well said, Richard. Russell, before we go to you, I think Linda would like to add something.
It is ironic that the person who confirmed for me that we had alien extraterrestrial bodies and craft at Norton Air Force Base was J. Allen Hynek. And it was the night before I was getting ready to go to Africa, where I was doing a film for UNICEF on child survival. And Hynek and Richard Sigismund, his dear friend and mine, they called me and said, "We are going to have extra time in Denver. Can you join us for dinner?" And I almost said no, because I was packing for the trip to Africa, and said, "No, I have to go to this dinner." And the three of us sat around a table in which Hynek explained why he was there, and Sigismund had picked him up, is that he had gotten contact from somebody at Norton Air Force Base about Hynek putting in a request that he understood that there were bodies and there were craft, and he was not well, and he wanted to see if he could see them. And that night at dinner, he had moisture in his eyes when he looked at me, and he said, "I got there. I got to Norton, but they wouldn't let me see." I'll never forget it. J. Allen Hynek sitting right across from me, going to Norton Air Force Base to see bodies and craft, and being denied when he got there. And I think everybody in this room and beyond is finally getting to a stage, as I said earlier, where we're beginning finally to understand this is not a joke, this is not just a ruse, this is real. And that it is way past time that we be told the truth. And dear Dr. Hynek, that day, that night, he came so close, and he was still denied, but he knew. There was no question. It wasn't if. There are bodies, there are craft of extraterrestrial biological entities and other equipment at Norton Air Force Base was there in 1985.
Thank you, Linda. Right before we began the presentation, I had a few moments with Mr. Russell Targ, of whom I'm a great admirer, and he started sketching out what I call the Russell Targ cheat code to self-awareness. And I wondered if you might speak to that, Russell.
Well, after 50 years of research in what we call parapsychology examination, it's become clear to me as a physicist that we significantly misunderstand the nature of the time and space we live in. Not only that, we were able to quiet our minds, and we spent 2 decades working for the CIA demonstrating this in useful ways, that we can quiet our minds and see into the distance, see into the future, and make use of that information. For example, briefly, one of our very first tasks for the CIA was to look at some coordinates that we didn't know where they were. And I sat in a little shielded room with Pat Price, the great psychic, and he drew a crane and said, "There's this giant crane here rolling back and forth over my body." And he then made an accurate drawing of that. The following day, the CIA showed us a top secret satellite photograph of the crane in Soviet Siberia, exactly as Price had drawn it. And it was top secret because in order to verify the accuracy of Price's drawing, they had to reveal to us the capabilities of American satellite photography. Following day, Price was asked to describe what are they doing with that crane? What's going on underground? And he said, I see they're trying to build a giant sphere, looks like a satellite weapon that they're trying to put together to shoot down the satellites that are taking these pictures. And it required 3 years later for us to actually see photographs of the spheres that he drew in detail and learn what they were really used for. And that was the beginning of our program. The end of our program, the last day of our program, I was asked, together with Hella Hammett, who I worked with, could you take a look at Brezhnev's office in the Kremlin? Neither of you, you've never been to the Kremlin, is that right? We laughed and said, no, we've not been to the Kremlin, thank you. He said, well, we'd like to know what Brezhnev's office looks like. So I sat in my easy chair and Hella lay down on a couch and said, I'm walking down a corridor hung with red brocades. There's a door at the end of the corridor covered with leather, and leather's held in place by brass upholstery tacks. If you open the door, you can see that there's a large wooden desk on the right side, and there's a window on the left side that allows you to see the great church in Red Square. And beyond that, behind Brezhnev's desk, there's a door. So I said, well, let's open the door and see what's there. So we opened the door psychically, walked down the stairs, and she said, there are metal stairs here leading to a large computer room, and I can hear it chirping. And at that point, I became frightened. I became paranoid. I felt that while we were wandering through the Kremlin, I had a lot of clearances, but I had no clearance to be in the computer room under the Kremlin. So I said, hell, I think we got enough. Let's get the hell out of here. And it just happened. I then left SRI, and she went on to other things. And shortly after that, I got an invitation from the Soviet Academy of Sciences. That's when it was still safe for Americans to go to Russia. And I lectured in the Kremlin about the work we had just published in the Proceedings of the Engineering Society. And I ended up by saying, and of course we know from this that it's no longer possible to hide anything. In the Soviet Union, hiding things and secrecy overwhelms all other activities. So there's a great shaking of teaspoons and teacups in the Kremlin as they thought about the idea that there's no secrets anymore. And in the end, they said, is there anything you'd like to see in the Kremlin? And I wondered what the hell do they have in mind? So I said, yes, Brezhnev is not here this month. I'd like to see his office. I don't need to see the prime minister, but I would like to see his office. So they led me down the hall, and I saw the red brocade Helen described. At the end of the hall, there was a door covered with leather, held in place by big brass upholstery tacks. There's a giant desk on the right. You could look out the window and see the church of St. Basil's in Red Square. I did not have the wit at that time to remember if there's a door behind his desk. Someday they'll have to do regression therapy on me. But what was clear to me at that time is that Hella Hammett, my good friend, was sitting in Palo Alto with me, quieting her mind, focusing her attention on the idea of Brezhnev's office, and described it in picture-perfect detail 6,000 miles away with no feedback at that time. So it shows that our consciousness is independent of time and space. We're able to see into the distance, see into the future, and the way we know we can see into the future is because shortly after leaving SRI, I did a formal experiment to forecast changes in the silver commodity market. We did 9 formal trials. Every trial was successful. We made $250,000. We're on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. So at least for a few weeks after that experiment, ESP was real. So I would be very happy if somebody at the International Remote Viewing Association would resume silver forecasting, make $1 million in the market, and then maybe psychic abilities would continue to be real into the future. Wonderful.
Thank you, Russell. Speaking of the future, I am curious about the future of disclosure. I think many of us would agree that we're living in a lowercase d disclosure period, and I want that capital D, big disclosure. So I'd like to ask our 2 first-hand experiencers, I don't care about the government, but do you think that ETs or interdimensionals, whoever, whenever they are, want what we consider to be the flying saucer landing on the lawn of the White House and a Walter Cronkite figure narrating the event? Do they want that kind of disclosure at some point? And if so, when? This is a very easy question. And if not, why not?
Well, I've had a few communications with the Greys, in one of which I did suggest this as a joke. And it occurs to me that because I did think of it as a joke, maybe it'll happen. And it would be probably the funniest thing in the history of the world, and also the most profoundly changing thing in the history of the world. However, I believe that there is a fundamental conflict here that is preventing anything from coming into focus. And I include in that a more open relationship with our visitors, and as well a more open approach on the part of the official world. And it comes down to a crop formation that occurred in, I believe, 2002, the Crabwood Formation. Linda, is it 2002? Yes.
Yes.
Anyway, the 2002, this formation is very important. It was relentlessly debunked because it was so important. But it was
before 9/11.
It was 2002.
Well, it was it.
Yeah, it was before 9/11.
Yeah.
No, well, okay, let's not worry about dates. There's a reason we're called legends. And one of the things that happens as you get older is you get all screwed up about dates. So we'll not even go there. It happened sometime in the early 2000s, and its relationship to 9/11 isn't what I'm talking about. So the formation consisted of a picture of an image of a gray and an image of a disc, and on the disc you could read what looked like some kind of code, and it was immediately discovered by crop circle people that it was ASCII code, which is easily readable, and it was interpreted, and the words on it are, "Beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises. There is good out there. Much pain, but still time." That's the core message. Now, the bearers of false gifts, I've got some of that in my office, some of the bismuth magnesium material. Those gifts have been expressed all over this planet in all kinds of ways that we don't know directly about, but all kinds of changes in metallurgy, in coatings, and many, many other things. And now we've figured out the bismuth magnesium, and there's a private company owned by a NASA scientist who is building an electrostatic device that does affect gravity, and they are getting more lift out of it than it weighs at the moment. So we're getting there. We're getting there. But the broken promises have to do with the fact that A, we aren't there yet, and B, the official world has essentially been tricked into keeping this secret far longer than it should have been. The good out there is what any experiencer is trying to engage with, because this is where the human future lies. There is somebody here who does want us to survive, who does want us to thrive, and does want us to enter the cosmos. And my life is all about them and making a relationship with them that is positive for us. And I am constantly impeded by people from within the government who will come saying, he's a demon, he's demonized, he works for the dark side. And I think to myself, they work for and are the dark side. So I'll sum up by saying, if we want this to move ahead, there's one place to go, and that is to the close encounter witnesses and to the general population of mankind. That's where this all belongs and always had belonged from the beginning, and where real disclosure will start. That's the only place it's going to start. Congress can monkey around with this all they want. The government can fight it all they want. But what matters is your relationship to the visitors and the experiencers, and building that across the world.
Travis, I'd like to ask you what you think the experiencers want, and then Linda, is there any chance you could speak about bismuth after that, since Whitley mentioned bismuth?
Yes, and tomorrow I'm doing a full workshop.
I think you are the bismuth expert.
It is fascinating.
So plug time. What time is the workshop tomorrow?
Do you guys, can
Okay, you
somebody
guys have
help me?
Okay,
Or Monday?
Monday, 10:30, okay.
Monday.
Travis, what do you? Sunday,
I
U.S.
thought it was Sunday.
Okay.
What time? 10:30 tomorrow morning. Meet me here. I'll
Okay,
talk
Travis,
to you about
well,
bismuth, magnesium,
On
zinc.
that subject, you'll have to check out her website, but you know, the desire, the yearning for disclosure is an entirely different subject than open acknowledgement and communication with the beings. Those are two different things. We're talking about the government just admitting the extent of their knowledge, and then the other is the actual melding of societies, or you know, so many people envision the open contact and communication with these beings in terms of gifts of technology, power to do so many things that we would love to do. And I say, be careful what you ask for. You know, the problem here is, are we ready? Look at all the mismanaged technology that we're already using across the planet. So I think part of the resistance on the part of the government and on the part of these entities is our lack of readiness. Part of being ready is to acknowledge that Western societies are not all there is in the equation. There are some other very powerful dictatorships on the planet. And just because we throw open the books and say, here's all we know, that they're going to do the same. Oh, I'm sure they would love to see what our government has harvested in terms of technology. But the giant threat is, if we did that, they're not going to reciprocate. And it's something that exists, a threat that we have to acknowledge and be aware of, that it's not a simple matter, that our government's reticence to tell us everything they know is perhaps in our best interest to some extent. I mean, they've acknowledged to some extent already that continuing to ridicule and discredit people that reporting these things wasn't working. It was having the opposite effect. It was destroying their own credibility. So they made some official announcements. They said, oh, okay, the government's going to acknowledge awareness of something that isn't ours and isn't in possession of our enemies, but there's something there. But they did it very strategically, late on a Friday in the news cycle. And so nothing was said over the weekend. And by Monday, deafening silence. Wow. I mean, they showed the gun camera footage and said, here's some incredible technology that we do not have and don't know the nature of. And then they got so little response that they actually staged the whole thing all over again. They said, for the first time, it was actually the second time, they showed the gun camera footage and said, yes, there's something out there. So they're acknowledging, because to salvage their own credibility, that it's not working anymore to say that those people that say they saw this are nuts. But on the other hand, total disclosure might not be in our best interest. That's just my own thinking. I'm not saying that these entities told me to say that, but it's just an opinion.
Thank you. So we may not be ready to ask them about disclosure, but could we ask them about the silver market? Or bismuth?
Bismuth. It was so interesting that when I wanted to try to find out what exactly did I have in those layers, that Art Bell first received a series of letters, and there were 2 different box shipments. One came with what turned out, with the work I did at Alcoa Aluminum, it was called Pure. It was 99% pure aluminum pieces that we would then later learn that there was more in those aluminum than just pure aluminum. And there was another box that had pieces that were quite silver on one side and black on the other, and in between you could see layers. And the first thing I did was call a scientist that I had worked with on abduction issues having to do with implants. And he never wanted his name to be public to this day. I've asked him again several times. But he did a lot of work on what's called a scanning electron microscope at the beginning of the silver and black pieces, and was able to describe that we were dealing with one side was 97.6% in magnesium, and that there were some zinc, and then the black side, it went black, silver, black, silver, black, silver for 26 layers. The black side was showing almost pure bismuth. And after I had reported about what we were finding, which was what we were doing on Coast, I was going to scientists and people who could help me, and then we would be reporting and we would get more suggestions. And one of the things that the scientist who had helped on the initial scanning electron microscope, he said, I think you really need to get this to an ion microprobe. And he said, I think there's one in Canada that will do magnesiums, and including magnesium-26. He was very interested in the quantity. And one in Washington, D.C. And I was able to talk with Eric Haury, H-A-U-R-I, a wonderful person who was very interested in the research and convinced me that I should go to Washington. And the price of it was like $1,000 to do this. And I said, Art, would you split this with me? Because I really want to find this. And he said, okay. So I went to Washington, D.C. and spent 8 hours with Eric Howry in the ion microprobe, which at that time, in that particular June of 1996 time frame, it was the only operating ion microprobe that could look at levels of magnesium-26. There was the one in Canada, there was something wrong and it was down. And during those 8 hours, one of the things that I remember, because he was doing analysis on one slide because it was alternating like a torte cake. So the black was bismuth, knew that there was a mixture of magnesium and zinc in the silver layers. And at one point he said, I know that you want me to give you how much magnesium-26 is in this, but he said, I am fascinated because if I'm reading this, it was one particular scan, and then he wanted to concentrate on it. He said, I think that I'm looking at pure bismuth here, but I've never seen anything like this. Those were his words that day, and this is what he meant. When he changed whatever was the way that he was measuring and looking for the amount of magnesium-26 on the silver side, he said, I've got to change X to look at the bismuth at the level that I want to. And then I remember he said, you know, I don't think that I have ever seen anything like this, and here's how he explained it. He said, I'm looking through the aspect of an ion microprobe, and I'm down at the level at which I'm kind of at a molecular level. And he said, I always see lead with bismuth. And on a periodic table, you can go see yourself. They're right next to each other. And I still remember him saying, I have never seen only bismuth in the ion microprobe. And I'm delivering that to you, he was a very respected scientist and worker with the ion microprobe. And that really stuck with me because it meant that the purity level of whatever however the levels had been made was extraordinary, because we got the same kind of, my God, this is 99% in the aluminum. That was in the summer of 1996. It would be 2 years later. I'm at a conference. I had done a presentation. People were standing up and clapping, and I and others, we would say, and if you have questions, come down and see us. At that time, that's what we did. And I had found that being able to say that to an audience and have people come around me turned out to be a very good insulation for people who might be scientists who want to come up and talk to me in my ear without anybody hearing and listening. And it was 2 years after the first scanning electron microscope that I was at a conference. I was surrounded by people, and I saw a man. He tipped a hat. He had on a straw hat, and he tipped the hat like this, and he pointed, and he was pointing to the chairs in the back of the room. I had no idea who it was. So after I had answered the questions of the people around me, he was still there, and I went back, sat down, and he pulled out one lab ID. I'm not going to, just think of the most famous labs, and this man had keys to about 6 of them. And he said, I don't know if I'll ever be able to talk to you on the phone. And it's too dangerous to be out in public. But he said, I think we can talk for a half hour here. He was completely familiar with everything I had reported on Coast to Coast and Dreamland about the bismuth, magnesium, zinc, and the aluminum. And he started unfolding for me. He said, I've worked on all of it. And he began laying out what he knew from a physics point of view about how the pure bismuth, and remember what Eric Howry was so struck. And now this man with access to major physics labs is saying it's the purity of this bismuth that is a key, and that it has to do that if you have and know what you are doing with pure bismuth, you can move in the direction of neutralizing gravity. And this particular individual has given me a tremendous amount of information. And tomorrow, 10:30, which room? Which room am I in tomorrow at 10:30?
Inspiration.
Inspiration. I will take everybody with me through various aspects of the bismuth, magnesium, zinc, and I think you will find it quite fascinating, and that from everything that I know today in 2024, bismuth, magnesium, zinc has been being worked in at least one lab for a very long time, and that the physicist who talked to me was one of those early investigators. And essentially, we are at the point of a discovery of something that extraterrestrials use as skins. That's the key. The physicists refer to them as skins. In this particular case, the silver black, that is one of the skins, but it will not provide moving light years in seconds through other dimensions if it doesn't have a parallel second skin.
Let's maybe
The
hold
second
that
skin-
second skin for your talk tomorrow.
Well, but
We don't want to give-
this is really important
Okay.
right now. The second skin, the pure aluminum, this physicist is the one who told me, and they will eventually learn that there are iridium atoms that have been placed in straight lines and 90-degree angles in that pure aluminum. Without the iridium, you have nothing.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Thank you, Linda. George, I want to acknowledge, we've met several times before. I've had that pleasure. And you telling me your sort of origin story is very heartwarming, and it's helping me get over my imposter syndrome of being where you typically are. You span all these phenomena. What do you think, let's call them our friends in other dimensions, worlds, and times, what do they want with us?
Well, I'll tell you, Paul. First of all, the reason why Richard Dolan is sitting here taller than everybody, he's on a whoopee cushion.
It's true.
So I can't say things on the radio. We are all here because we want to believe that we are not alone in the universe. We need to grasp the fact that there's more out there than we know. And just looking at just a few of the panelists, I mean, my God, Whitley Strieber, abducted, wrote his book Communion. A movie was based on that. Historical person, Travis Walton, abducted, fire in the sky. He and his logger buddies passed lie detector tests. What does that tell you?
That
They
it's real.
passed lie detector tests. Paul Hynek's father was part of all of this. It's truly amazing. The answers are right here, Paul. We just have to open our eyes to see it. With reporters like Linda, remote viewers like Russell, and great researchers like Richard Dolan, we know that we are not alone. We just need to let the rest of the world realize that.
Richard, Might you have any thoughts on the subject?
Oh, does he?
Sure. I mean, I where do I begin? I want to add one thing to what Linda was talking about, that the bismuth magnesium piece. We were just chatting beforehand about it, and you recall just 3 months ago, 2.5 months ago, the Arrow report came out with a comment on, I think it was that piece. I mean, it was a bismuth magnesium piece, which it thoroughly sought to debunk as conventional. Of course, they didn't tell you how they got to that conclusion. I was astonished that they had the gall to insert that statement in there. I mean, after everything that Linda just said, I remembered listening on Vimeo to Hal Puthoff discuss that. I think it was the very same piece in his 2018 lecture for the Society for Scientific Exploration, which when I told him that was on the internet, he was shocked. He had no idea it had been recorded and put on Vimeo, but it's there. And he also described it as, he essentially said it was extraterrestrial. He didn't say that, but he essentially did, frankly. And I remember him saying that we didn't even know how this thing was fabricated. It was the layers are so fine, exact. And then he said, we didn't even know what this would be for.
1 to 4 microns is equal to where the magnesium and the zinc and the bismuth. And the bismuth is 1 to 4 microns. A blood cell is 8.
Yeah, this is the level of precision. And then he continued and said, well, that was then, and years pass and science begins to catch up. And they started putting some ideas together about this. And he essentially said exactly what you said. He didn't use the word gravity, but he implied that it had a gravitic effect, I think. I'm just amazed that we got to a point where we're moving in this disclosure era, so we say, and then we get this complete dud of a report coming out just a couple of months ago that would have flunked a junior high school exam because of the lack of effort and work that was put into it. I'm just amazed by that. But I just want to bring this back to one more of a philosophical orientation. I'm listening to everyone here and all of these amazing panelists who've had a lifetime of experiencing and thinking about this incredible phenomenon that we're all interested in. I will say I fell into the UFO subject about 30 years ago. It was 30 years ago, and I was in a different life. I thought I was going to teach at a university and going through that whole process. And I was beginning to move out of all of the... I was never really a fully mainstream kind of a young guy. It's true, but I was a lot more mainstream than I am now. And I remembered I was studying all kinds of elements of American history and world history. And it's like I fell into this hole called UFOs. I saw Timothy Good's book, Above Top Secret, on a bookshelf in a store. There was a subtitle called The Worldwide UFO Cover-Up that caught my attention. I was like, wow. And it's a very, very big book. It's a great book. I'll never forget standing in that store. It was in Syracuse, New York. And I'm flipping through the pages and recognizing names, recognizing departments that I had studied in a completely different context. And I thought, is there a thing called cultural schizophrenia? I remember thinking that. It's like there's an official truth that you're supposed to believe, that you're all taught, and then there's this other stuff that looks like it's true, unofficially. What's the story with that? I'll never forget. I bought that book and I read it, got onto what was then the internet in the early 90s, and I had no idea how this subject would transform my life. I didn't have the slightest. I thought, well, I'm going to study this for a few months, maybe at the most, figure out what I think. Is this real? Is this not real? And then move on. That was my initial plan. And not only that, I laugh when I think about this, but I was so conservative about it. I thought, well, I'll answer the question if I think this is real, but I don't want to get into any weird stuff like abductions or crop circles or animal mutilations. Ugh. I thought I'm staying away from that. And the problem, of course, with that is you really can't avoid it. It's like I liken it to going to an incredible beach and where the ocean is right there, and there's all the water, and you put your little toe in the bed, and you say, well, that's enough. You can't. Who can do that? Maybe some people can. I can't. And so, I guess what I'm saying is this subject opened a door for me. It changed my life in every possible way. I remember the late skeptic Philip Klass.
My hero.
Your hero. He used to talk about a UFO curse. I'll bet some of you remember this. And he said the curse is this, that when you die, you will be no closer to the truth about this than you are right now. And true to form, he got everything wrong about that because, first of all, we do actually know more. I think research is moving us forward, not backward in that. So that part is not true. But the real part is that he missed the most important aspect of this, which is the journey itself. It's the journey that opens us into becoming much more than what we were. It's because you learn to be brave by asking questions that no one else is willing to ask. And that in itself changes you, and that in itself makes you a leader, and that in itself transforms your whole character. And you find you become, and I mean you, everyone here, you become more than you were because you're opening your own mind and you're engaging your natural curiosity, which is, it's what you are. We're curious. And so, you know, there's a lot of different subjects that can take you down that path. For me, it was UFOs. And it opened me up. And before long, I discovered this thing called remote viewing. I don't even know how that happened. It was early on. I think I learned that with some of these remote viewers, is that what they're called? They remote view aliens? Is this true? I learned this early, and I looked into it, and I thought, oh, wow, it is true. They did. And how is that? And then it made me wonder, how could something like remote viewing work? What does that say about the nature of our reality and the nature of what we are? And so one area of exploration led to another, and then another, and it didn't give me all the answers. It led to countless more questions, but in the process made my life infinitely more interesting and often kept me awake at night, you know, but that's the thing. It's the journey, and it causes all of us here on this panel and every one of you that's here with us to grow in ways that you just can't predict. You just can't predict because you decide at a certain point you become brave enough to break the shackles and the boundaries of what you were taught to believe. And you realize you do live in a society that is culturally schizophrenic. Mm-hmm. There is an official truth that you're supposed to believe. That is your consensus culture. But there's this other stuff that's actually true. It's unofficially true, but it's really true. And for those of us who decide we want to be truth seekers, like that's not everyone who does that. That's for a minority of people, I think. But if you're of that minority, and I bet everyone in this room is, then it transforms you. And you become a local hero. You become, I don't know, someone that leads the path for others to learn from and to admire. I think this is the greatest subject in the world. This whole idea of exploring our mind and discovering what is out there and what has come here. I cannot imagine something of greater, profound importance than that. I just can't. So I just feel myself lucky every day to do this.
My father liked the saying that has often been attributed to Richard Feynman, that there are two kinds of people in the world. This gets to your point about questions, Richard. Those who are okay with questions they cannot answer, and those who are not okay with their answers being questioned.
Beautiful.
I think that breaks the world with a neat fault line into two groups, and I'm pretty sure most of us are in that first group. I'm sure all of us have talked to people who are interested. They see things about UFOs or other phenomena, but they say, but I don't understand how they get here. Why would they come here? And they just dismiss the evidence. Well, funny thing about evidence, it's there whether or not you have a pat answer to give it. I'm going to ask Russell another question, and while we do that, do we have microphones for the audience to ask questions? Is that a yes? Okay, cool. Okay, can the microphone elves start circulating to folks who have questions and maybe line up? Russell, I'd like to ask you a question. Another easy one. What do you think might be the next big advancement in human consciousness? Perfect.
Easy.
I think that we will learn something more about human consciousness when we learn something more about time. For example, many people have precognitive dreams. They go to sleep at night, they have a dream about some odd thing that's not part of their normal repertoire, and then it occurs the next day. That shows that their consciousness is able to transcend at least time in addition to space. So I think one of the things that's experimentally in our control, that the aliens don't control us in that regard. We can do experiments to find out the accuracy and reliability of looking into the future, which will tell us a lot about our consciousness and about the nature of time.
You know, I have to just say that that is an incredibly brilliant statement, Russell. That absolutely goes to the core issue, and you never hear anyone talking about it, but it is so true that the experience of human consciousness is so intimately connected to the process of time and duration. And once we have understood that more clearly, we're going to get into a whole different level of self-knowledge and an understanding of where our mind can actually take us. I applaud you, Russell. That was brilliant.
All right, that brings to an end our Legends panel. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to acknowledge once again Peter Davenport and state that we wouldn't be here without the people on this panel. Thank you very much.